I'm going with a wire, which means I'm obviously going to trip over it. But you'll all enjoy that, so that's fine. Awkward conversations. Those of you who know me, may not surprise you to know that there are many awkward conversations in my life, and there are many stupid things that I get involved in. And I was thinking about kind of just a mate visited last weekend, and he visited with his 14-year-old kid, and I'm sadly old enough to remember this kid being born and his older brother Joel being born, who's 16. And I remember years ago, they would kind of live back in Grimsby where I grew up, and so we would only see them a couple of times a year as we would kind of visit. And one year, when maybe Joel was, 2, 3, his mum had taught him, based on photos, she taught him my name and my mate's name. So when I went up and saw him, I was like, "Hi, Joel." And Diana would be like, "Joel, who's this?" He'd be like, "It's Del." And I'd be like, "Oh, that's cool." And she was like, "And what is Del?" He'd go, "He's funny." I was like, "That's right. I mean, that is great parenting." And I was like, "That is brilliant." And then she went, "And who's that?" And he went, "It's Mark." And she said, "And what is Mark?" "Mark's a Wally." That is right. I mean, that is playing the long game for parenting. I was like, I just imagine her teaching her child thinking, this will be worth it. This will be worth it. I'll get a laugh at Christmas for this. And on Christmas Day, we were sat in a row with Joel and Noah, and my mate Mark was playing trains on, we have pews in the church back home. And so he was playing with these trains along, and he wasn't doing it correctly somehow, and Joel was not happy. And so he was like, "No, you're doing it wrong, Mark. Mark, you're a Wally. Mark's a Wally." Mid-sermon, silent. And I am not mature enough to cope with that. I am like, I have never loved a child more in my life. Everyone turns around. And my mate, who's like the husband, he just turned to Diane. He was like, "We're going to talk about this at home." And I was like, he's right. And they had an awkward conversation back home. But she's the best parent, I think we all know. He might be a sensible man, but who wants that? And so, when Andy and Beth have their kid, you best believe I am going to be doing things like that on the sly. It's happening. So, we're going to finish off our Minor Prophets series. And so, today we're looking at the book of Malachi. So, it's the last book of the Old Testament. It's the last book both in order and chronologically. So, it's the last book before Jesus comes. And there's about a 450-year gap between this and Jesus coming. And what we're going to see is it kind of is later on than when the other guys kind of have shared their stories. It comes after all that stuff. And just as Lucas was sharing a few weeks ago about Israel being in captivity and then them coming back and they hadn't rebuilt the temple yet. Well, now we're at the stage where they have rebuilt the temple and religion's going on and things have started, but actually not a lot's changed in their hearts. Things have not really turned around. And what we're going to see here is that this whole book really is framed as a conversation, quite a difficult, awkward conversation between God and between people. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at this in kind of 3 acts. And rather than just kind of read out tons and tons, what we have is 2 excellent people to do a dramatic reading for us in the position of kind of God and man. So the book, Malachi writes stuff and he says, look, God says this, and then it goes, and then the people's response is this, and then God responds again. But instead of just me reading all that out, we have 2 people to play God and people. Don't we, Toby and Eve? Yes, we do. So Toby and Eve are going to come up. Big round of applause for Toby and Eve. Craig, have you got your microphone? So one of you can have mine and one of you can have Craig's microphone. Now, when they finish, they are coming up 3 times. So when they finish, don't clap them at the end. We'll give them a clap at, we'll give them a clap at the end of 3. Otherwise, they'll be milking it, and we don't want that. Okay. So, right. So, so I'm just going to pray, and then I'm going to hand to these guys. So, God, I just pray that, through your scriptures, through your word, that you would just speak to us, that something of your truth would just come alive in our hearts, and that we would know more about you in this place. Help us with that, we pray. Amen.
I love you guys.
Really? How have you loved us?
Look at history. Look how differently I've treated you. Jacob from Esau. I loved Jacob and hated Esau. Seriously, take a good look back. Then you'll see how faithfully I've loved you. And you'll want even more. Saying, may God be even greater, beyond the borders of Israel. Isn't it true that a son honors his father and a worker respects his master? So, if I'm your father, where's the honor? If I'm your master, where's the respect? Your priests despise me.
No way. How do we despise you?
By your shoddy, sloppy, defiling worship.
What do you mean, defiling? What's defiling about it?
Well, when you say the altar of God is not important anymore, worship of God is no longer priority, that's defiling. And when you offer worthless animals for sacrifices and worship, animals that you are trying to get rid of, blind and sick and crippled animals, isn't that defiling? Try a trick like that with your banker. How far do you think it'll get you? Why doesn't one of you just shut the temple doors and lock them? Then none of you can get in and play at religion with this silly, empty-headed worship. Because of your priests, I will rebuke your descendants. I will smear on your faces the dung from your festival sacrifices, and you'll be carried off with it. Maybe that'll wake you up. My covenant with Levi, the original priest, was to give life and peace. I kept my covenant with him, and he honored me. He stood in reverent awe before me.
Thanks, guys. They're good, aren't they? They're good. Oh, you're going to clap anyway. Man, you're going to get 3 sets of applause. That is, you deserve it. That's good. Good. Yeah, so Toby looked at me as if when we got to the point of, I will smear dung on your faces. It's in the Bible, Tobes. It's in the Bible. I got asked to preach. I was telling the youth on Friday, I got asked to preach back home, which is great and an honor. But the guy who asked me said, and also, can you do no toilet stories this time? I was like, what do you think I am as a man? I'm just saying, like, no one says that to God when he's like, that's in the Bible, smear dung on the faces. I didn't just pick it because of that. It is in there. And so we are going to look at the scriptures as well. So I realize some of you will be like, that is, not the language that's always used. I understand that. We will look at the scriptures as well. And so we're going to see that we're going to look at this in a kind of drama of 3 kind of acts. And so the first thing we see is Act 1, we have a relational breakdown. That this kind of situation between God and people, the relationship there is kind of broken. It starts by saying, like, if we look at the first couple of verses, we'll come back to argumentative in a second. If we look at the first couple of verses, right at the start, it says, like, God saying, I have loved you. And then the first response from people is like, really? Like, how have you loved us? And imagine being in that place. Like, we all get defensive at certain things. Like, when people kind of say negative stuff about us. I was telling the guys last week that I went to Australia at the start of this year, and I was in a church in Australia, and I ordered a coffee. And when the guy found out that I was English, he said, I can just make you a terrible coffee because you English don't know what good coffee is. And I was like, all right, mate. And so straight away, I was like, this guy's looking for a fight, which is not what I was expecting in church in Australia. But straight away, I was like, who do you think you are calling us? And I was like, man, I have got defensive immediately. But here, this is just like God saying, I loved you. And straight away, like, yeah, whatever. How do you love us? And like, and those of you who are parents in the room, I just imagine saying that to your kids and going like, I love you guys. And they go, yeah, how do you love us? You'd be like, oh, that is tough. That is hard to hear. Like, I do a lot of the youth stuff here, and these kids are amazing. But if I was like, guys, I really care about you kids. I love you kids. And if they were like, yeah, as if, what do you do? I'd be like, oh, man, it would be devastating. But that is the place where we see that they're in, that God says this, and straight away they can't kind of cope with it. They're defensive and go, what have you done? But instead of God really like smacking them down, it kind of says, look, honestly, look how much I've loved you in the past. And I realize in the verse it says, like, Jacob I have loved and Esau I have hated, this other group of people, this other nation. And I don't think it's there to say I hate those. I think God's saying, look how much I've blessed your nation. Look, compared to the other nations, look at what you've had from me. Look at how much I've blessed you. Look at how much compared to other people. He's not saying I hate these people, I don't believe. And so we start in this place where it's really defensive. And what we're going to see is, I think that this kind of topic, we could frame everything that's going to come under that initial statement, like, I have loved you. And this theme of I have loved you and God saying, look back, and as we're going to see, look forward. That is what we're going to see. Because at the start here, it says, look back in history. Look at how I've loved you. And what we're going to see is towards the end, God says, and I tell you, in the future, I'm going to continue to love you. I'm going to continue to pour out my love and have that for you. And so that is the kind of first thing that we see, is that we have this argumentative relationship which God is longing to kind of break through and get past. The second thing we see is that these are a people who cut corners. That not only are they defensive and they're in such a bad place that they can't cope with God even saying that he loves them, but they are cutting corners. And we're going to see this in the next set of verses, But to illustrate my point, we're going to talk about this thing called Fitzy Bingo. Now, so I work in a dull office sometimes. Like, I work from home a lot of the time, but I worked in an office for like 7 years, and we were all accountants. Imagine the fun we had. And so we would, just have party after party. But in January and February, we didn't really have much teaching. It was like your prep time for your courses, but I was thinking, I've prepped that course because I've taught it 6 years in a row. I think I'm all right. So we would just chat and do not a lot. And one of the favorite things that we would do to waste time is we would play this game called Fitzy Bingo. And we had this guy in our office called Fitzy who just says ridiculous things. Like, he has his own rhyming slang, but Scouse rhyming slang instead of Cockney rhyming slang. And so what we would do is we'd knock together these Fitzy Bingo cards. 4 of us would each have one with about 6 or 9 things on it. And then we just kind of sending him around going, Fitzy Bingo today, guys? Yeah, Fitzy Bingo's on. And so straight away, we'd all have that up on our screens in the background. And then every time he said one of these phrases, we'd tick it off. And at the end of the day, whoever's ticked the most off wins. You got to pass the time, haven't you? You got to pass the time. And these are the things that he would say. He's a weird fella. Like, if something was bad, he would say, oh man, that is not Robin Hood. Okay, and he'd go, it's not Robin Hood, it's Robin Bad. That doesn't even work, Fitz. Just say bad. But so he would say that. As a junior footballer, he used to be good, and he has a program where he played for Liverpool schoolboys, and Stephen Gerrard was a substitute. And man, he used to tell us that 1,000 times a year. And so it wasn't hard to get him onto. Were you a good footballer when you were a kid, Fitz? Yeah, I kept Gerrard on the bench. Thank you. Tick. And so it was an easy one to tick off. If you had the Gerrard on the bench story, you could get that in, no problem. If somebody had a really frowny, negative face on them, it'd be like, what's up with your grid, mate? You have a grid like sour mash, which doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know what sour mash is, what it looks like, but if you frowned, you had a grid like sour mash. When he was surprised, he would shout, Snakey Magoo. And so, the guy was an enigma. I promise you, this is 1 of 4 cards. They get just as weird. There's another 3 cards that I could have pointed out that would have been just as odd. If he was hungry, he would say he was Hank Ravenous Marvin. And then finally, when something was bad, he would say, oh man, that is rubbish. I wouldn't give that the rag man. And so there is a slight point to this. And the final thing, that is the point of what we're getting at, is that we're at the situation where Israel are cutting corners with the way that they're giving their offerings. So this phrase, I won't give that the rag man, that is where they are. They're kind of saying, well, what can we get away with giving? What is the least that we can get away with? And in that first chapter, it says, where's the respect? God's saying, if I'm your master, if I'm your king, where's the respect that I'm due? And how are we disrespecting you? And he's saying, honestly, the offerings you give me are just rubbish. You just give me the stuff you don't want. Just give me the stuff that you're not going to use for everything. And they're just kind of probably thinking, what can we get away with? What is the least that we can do and still be all right with God? Because they were the only people that would have known God at this stage, that would have known Yahweh. And so they would have been like, right, do you know what? Surely we're better than everybody else. So surely whatever we do, as long as we give an offering, that'll do us. But the point of the offering was to kind of show, this is how important God is. This is our act of worship. This is, we have messed up and we are so sorry, God. We want to give you something to show how important you are to us. And they're saying, what is the minimum that we can get away with? And I get that from students a lot, where they kind of say, Dal, what do I need to learn for this exam? And the answer is always everything. You need to learn the syllabus. And they go, yeah, but seriously, what do I need to know? And I know the question is, what is the least revision I can do and pass this exam? That's the question that they're asking me. And the truth is, they can cut corners and pass that exam. That's not what I tell them, because I'm a good tutor. And so, but I know for a fact that I'm telling you stuff that I don't believe. I'm like, no, you need to learn it all. And they're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, not really, but I'm going to tell you need to learn it all anyway. Because if I tell you to skip one thing, and that one thing comes up, there's only one thing you remember. You told me not to do this, and I am a coward. And so therefore, I'm saying you learn everything. But that's where the people are. They're kind of let's just give something, and that'll be enough. You know what, in 21st century UK, it can be easy enough to think, do you know what, there's not necessarily loads of people that go to church, so therefore whatever we do, if we turn up on a Sunday, if I go to a life group, if I help set up, that is enough, isn't it? That is good. And you know what, we can kind of think, what corners can I cut, and God is still all right. And you know what, in church, you can do. You can kind of blag your way through, cut corners, and be all right. But you know what, God is not just saying it because he's thinking, I want you guys to work harder, I want you to give me better stuff. God is saying, honestly, there is a better way. I want your hearts. I don't just want stuff for the sake of stuff. I want to know that you worship me. And Andy even taught this morning about giving our best and really laying down our hearts and laying down our life. And you know what, the crazy thing is that when the people offer these sacrifices and these things of worship that really are meaningful, God's going to bless them and he's going to be so close to them. And I feel like God's so frustrated going, honestly, guys, this will be so much better for you if you don't cut corners with me, if you prioritize my relationship with you, then honestly, life will be better. It's not necessarily going to be easy, but it's going to be better. And as I kind of think about that and was reading this, it's easy to kind of think, people just having a go and it's difficult. But I read this and I was like, oh man, Adam Deller, where do you cut corners in your life? Do you cut corners with the time that you spend with God? Do you just kind of cut that short and get on with just busy things and work and other stuff? When you're with him, do you quickly just go to your phone and check notifications or send an email too quickly? Do you cut corners in the way you love people? Do you cut corners in kind of just when you know you should be praying for somebody or knowing you should be sending them a message or whatever it is? Do you cut corners because it's easier not to do it? Do you cut corners where there's kind of sin that you struggle with and you just kind of get slack on it? Where are we cutting corners? And I was like, oh man, God, I don't want to be somebody who just goes, that's probably good enough. If we're going to do this, we may as well do it well, do it properly. None of us are forced to be here. None of us have to be here. So why don't we just do it with everything? That's what I say to the young people. I'm like, man, none of us want to turn up and just sing a few songs. No offense to singing, but I would never go anywhere in the world to just go and sing. I'm not a karaoke man. That is my idea of an absolute nightmare. What do you want to do tonight, Dale? Do you want to go out and sing? No. Flipping right, I don't want to do that. You think I'm insane? But it's not about coming and singing. It's about going, man, there is a God who I know is worthy of my worship. And what I want to do is lay down my heart before him. I don't want to come and just sing. I get no joy out of the act of singing. But do you know what? When I lay down my heart before him and say, God, you are so worthy. Somehow there's this connection that's restored with heaven. And somehow he inhabits our praises and something, even though it's for him, somehow in the process of it, I get changed and I get blessed and I get renewed somehow. And that's part of the deal. And so that's the second thing that we kind of see is that these are people who cut corners. And the third thing we see in their relational breakdown is that they kind of lose this sense of awe. Okay, so they've kind of gone, they're argumentative and they're defensive. They're cutting corners. And then God says, honestly, I had this covenant with this guy, Levi, the original priest. And as we're going to see in the verses that we'll read in a second, it said he stood in awe of him. And they've lost that awe. Because if you are in awe of God, when he tells you he loves you, you don't fire back with how. How do you love me? Of course you don't. You'd be like, man, this God who created the world, he loves me. And when I went to see my friends in Australia, we'll get to that verse in a second, they live in some amazing places And so these people, Craig and Diana, they were like my mum and dad in Mozambique when I was there for 3 months. And they lived, that is 10-minute drive from their house. Imagine having that 10-minute drive from your house. There's these crazy cliffs and the ocean. So, obviously in no way was I jealous. And so then my other mates, this was 10 minutes from their house. And so they were like, oh yeah, do you want to go on this walk? I mean, normally the idea of, if someone says to me, do you want to go on a walk? No. Surely, if there's one thing I've learned in life, sitting is better than walking. Indoors is better than outdoors. Fact. We all know this. Boo, indeed. I can just see Lowry with the disgust that he has. And so, but they had this, and they were like, do you want to come on this walk? And that is a road, but it has a walkway by it. And it was amazing, because obviously that is just this incredible place to walk. And there it is at night. And obviously many of us have grown up around beautiful places like this. I obviously, when I was preparing this, thought, I am going to Google image where I grew up because it's a beautiful place. And of course, we all know what's probably going to happen. And so I genuinely Googled Grimsby, which obviously is an amazingly sounding place. And so the first 4 images were from a film that none of us should ever watch because it's a film that will paint my town in a very bad light and let's stand in solidarity. And so therefore, do not watch a film called Grimsby. It's going to paint us all as terrible human beings, I would imagine. If you have watched it, it's all right. We're going to do some repentance today. And so, but the first actual picture of my town above Sacha Baron Cohen was this. There it is. That's the beauty I grew up in. Grimsby. What's the first image? Wow, there it is. Oh, that is home. And so we kind of think, oh yeah, but if I grew up in this place with all this beauty. We'd never get tired of it. We'd never get fed up of it. But it's just not true, is it? Like, it becomes normal. It becomes what you're used to. And so it can be in our relationship with God. That these people, when it says there that the chief priest, he stood in reverent awe before me. He said, this guy knew what it was to know who I am. And it can be so much like that with God, that we can go to an amazing meeting and God's Spirit can move and we can be amazingly touched. And then we can go home, and then the next day we can get up, be rushed, get on about our days, crack on with work or whatever we're doing, go to bed, and we've not spent a minute with him, less than 24 hours after an amazing encounter. And so we can lose that awe so quickly and so brutally at the cost of that relationship. And that is where they were. They were in this place where they replaced that awe of God with just routine, with religion, with just some practices of this is what we're going to do. And they'd lost sight of who this God is. And we're going to go away to it's great to go on retreats to the Naturally Supernatural and Soul Survivor, because it's just this time where loads of people are crying out to God and we can be filled. But we don't want this awe to be a once-a-year thing. None of us want to be in that place where we think, we have to go away to have this amazing time of awe with God. And in our lives, we just get through. None of us want that. We want to be people who know what it is to be amazed by God over and over and over again and live in that place of awe. And when we planted LifeChurch all that kind of time ago, 5 years ago, we did it thinking, man, we can't do this. We have no idea. And it was amazing that somehow God's plan, to set up a church in Warrington, involved just some pretty average people. No disrespect to the Jewists. And so, but it involved some pretty ordinary people. If there's part of me that thinks, man, God, if you want to start a church with me, you better be in this, because we are in trouble. Because they're going to give me a microphone and you can see the chaos that happens. And so I was like, man, but do you think, God, it's so awesome that this God who has these crazy plans somehow involves us, just ordinary people in it. And it's incredible to know that. But what we don't want to do is 5 years down the line go, now we've got a structure. We know our Sunday works. We've got some life groups. We can have our routine. We don't want to be that church. Our heart is never to be that church. Our heart is to be, God, whatever you say. We want to be people who are in awe of you. We want to be people who know what it is to hear your voice. We want to know what it is to respond to your voice. It's an incredible honor to be able to pray and read the Bible and just have this amazing thing where God, who created the whole world, somehow shares something with you. That is just incredible, to think that a God of the universe would somehow speak to us and to pass his words and his messages through us. Which takes us to Act 2. Don't worry, those of you looking at the clock. Act 1 is the longest act, so bear in mind. I'm aware. So we get our dramatic people to come back up again, and so they are going to take us through the second act of our conversation.
Right, so I've heard it said, all who do evil are good in the eyes of the Lord, and he is pleased with them. So where is this so-called God of justice?
Are you kidding me? I'll present compelling evidence against sorcerers, adulterers, liars, those who exploit workers, those who take advantage of widows and orphans, those who are inhospitable to the homeless. You have a long history of ignoring my commands. You haven't done a thing I told you. Return to me so I can return to you.
Well, come on, genius. How do we return?
By being honest. Do honest people rob God? But you rob me day after day.
Oh, come on. How have I robbed you?
The tithe and the offering, that's how. And now you're under a curse, the whole lot of you, because you're robbing me. Bring your full tithe to the temple. Test me in this and see if I don't open up heaven itself to you and pour out blessings beyond your wildest dreams.
Thanks, guys. Good. They're going to clap again. Oh, man, that is... Who knew, eh? Who knew? Hopefully the third one, they'll just leave you with a big silence and it'll be really awkward. So the second act, we get to shared interest. And this is where we see three elements where God talks about the things that are on his heart and the things that he wants us to be after. Because we all know that relationships work better when people have the same heart for something, when people do things that they're passionate about and care about together. And so it is with God. That is the aim, is that we catch his heart for things and we respond and we live with that same heart. Now, twice a year I go away with my friends to a weekend away for some of us to just kind of catch up, which has been unfairly tagged the Geekend, because we maybe do some, maybe we have things like loads of computers out there and play computer games and board games and it's not normally the kind of thing that the men in the group like to explain to their girlfriends / partners / wives, because they do no understand. And so we had one woman, she walked in, because it's back where I grew up, and she walked in to kind of see us all, and she just saw 20 men just sitting around, some of them playing computer games, some of them playing board games, probably the smell of men who hadn't showered for a day or so. Not a pleasant place. She walked in, you could tell she was thinking, I'm just going to pretend that my husband is not into this. This is not going to help my relationship. And then another woman walked in next year, and she walked in, she was like, this is amazing. And she was like, wow, can I come? I'm like, no, you're a woman. And so, but then she got snowed in, because it was 4 or 5 years ago when there was loads of snow, and she had to stay over, and so we had a woman in the place, and it was freaky, and we're like, oh man, maybe one of us should shower, and so wash up or something, just so that we're not despicable human beings. And genuinely, when she went home, she was just dating my friend, and we all went, Box, you need to marry her. And they were like, you will not find a woman who's so excited about this. Marry her. And he has married her, and it's all good. And so, but we know it works best with these kind of shared interests that we have in our lives. And what we're going to see here is that there are 3 things that God has on his heart that he wants his people to be involved in. And the first one is justice. And what happens is the people are like, where's this God of justice? And they're basically saying, evil people are succeeding, kind of bad things are happening. And where is this God who is supposed to be just? Where is he? And we see that in this first couple of verses. And it says, you've wearied God with your words. Well, how have we wearied him? And it's saying, by everyone who does evil are good in the eyes of the Lord. Or where's the God of justice? And then God responds by saying, honestly, I am present compelling evidence about how unjust you guys are. How little you care about orphans, how little you care about the homeless and widows and all this kind of stuff. And it can be so easy to look at this kind of broken world and go, God, this world's a mess. How can this world be a mess and you are somehow God? But it is a mess, and there is a lot of brokenness in this world. But you know what? God calls us to be part of bringing his kingdom in there. He doesn't call us to stand by and sit off and go, God, can you just fix this? I don't want a part of it. Can you fix this? God's heart is always for justice. But if God's heart is for justice, then we need to partner with him in that and say, God, if you care about justice, I want to be somebody who cares about justice too. I want to be somebody who doesn't just kind of moan at you and say how unfair things are. I want to know what it is to share your heart in that. And that can be a difficult conversation. That can be a difficult thing to ask ourselves in this world. And as I was kind of preparing this, I was like, man, Adam Della, what injustice do you care about? What breaks your heart? What do you take a stand against? What is there in this world that you kind of make a stand and say, no, I want to be part of bringing God's kingdom to that situation? And we can talk about great stuff that as a church we're involved in, and Cap, and when Penny comes from Mayak and talks about these women who are sold into slavery and into prostitution, we can be part of that, and that's great. But as a man, I don't want to hide behind just, our church do some good stuff. I want to know what it is in my heart that God is saying, this situation, it needs restoration, it needs hope, it needs me. And you know what? You're my person to be part of bringing that in. And I want to know that God can trust me and use me to that situation. So I'm asking myself, God, where is there injustice? And I see it in young people. I see the pressure young people are under with identity and all of the stuff, and how easy it is for this system to chew up young people and tell them that they're not worth much. And you know what? If I have to stand up with those young people and tell them that they matter week after week after week, well, then that is my job, and I'm more than happy to do it, because do you know what? God believes it, I believe it. And we have to be people who are going to do it. We can't just say, oh, let's just pray for them and hope that God tells them he loves them. We will do that, but we need to do it as well and stand up and tell them that and stand in the gap for those people. As well as justice, God wants intimacy. And Craig shared that this morning, that God is a God who longs for intimacy. And somehow this incredible God, he wants to draw near to us. And we see that in 3:7, where he says, return to me and I will return to you. That somehow this God wants a relationship and a closeness with us. And we see, obviously many of you have small kids or have gone through that small kid thing. And one of the coolest things that you see about small kids is not only your ability to teach them to say bad things about your friends. That is probably actually the best thing. But like one of the best things is to see that intimacy, that desire they have to just be with their parents, to just spend that time, no agenda, but just to be close. My mate, Mark, who is a Wally, like he has his own kids now, and he has not thankfully taught them to tell me I'm a Wally. But like his kid, Dylan, is incredible, and like I'm not very good with kids. Like over 10, I'm all right. Like you can send me your over 10s, I can cope with that. Under 10, no chance. Like I don't understand stuff. But this kid's a bit weird, so I like him, and so we get on. And so like he'll come round and we'll be like, can we play a game? Yeah, what game do you want to play? Wild Beasts, which basically involves us getting loads of pencils and stabbing his dad. And I'm more than happy with that. Like, I'll play that game every day of the year, Dylan. Let's get your dad on the floor. Keep going. Go for the face. And so, like, you know, it's not my job to raise that child. And so, like, but he does incredible things like, Dale, do you want to play hide and seek? Yeah, I want to play hide and seek, Dylan. He'd go, okay, I'm going to go and hide. I'm hiding in the wardrobe. No, don't tell me, Dylan. It's not how hide and seek works. Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll go hide under the bed. No, it's still not how it works, Dylan. But there's an innocence there, and I'm just seeing him just kind of come to his dad and go, Daddy, and just like curl up with him and just be with him with no agenda. And you think, man, there's something in that intimacy that God wants with us and how we're supposed to respond to God, that there is no kind of other motive. It's not to get the next preacher. It's not to go before him because we're leading a meeting, but just to go before him. Why? To be still, to be near him, to draw close to him and be in love. And that is the heart that he wants us to have. He wants us to be people who know what it is to come close to him and be in awe with him and have that intimacy with him. And the third thing that we see in that shared interests is trust. Okay, and so the way that he talks about, do you trust me? And I know I came up here about, a month ago and talked about money, but we can't avoid it. It's in this passage. And he talks about it in the form of money. And he says, they say, how are we robbing you? And he said, honestly, you're robbing me with your offerings. And he said, I promise you, bring the tithe into the storehouse and I will bless you. Now, this was a difficult time in Israel. There was drought, there was famine. So none of us are saying this is easy. But the first thing to do when things are difficult is to kind of shut the door and say, look, we need to sort ourselves out. We need to kind of go, look, things are tight. Do you know what we're going to cut corners on? We're going to cut corners on giving this offerings into the temple. You know, and as a church, we don't talk about tithes. We don't talk about giving 10%. Because we don't believe that when we look at Jesus, we believe that he talked about a generosity, and we talked that he didn't necessarily talk about tithes in a positive way, but it's about giving from the heart, not just a set percentage. But the danger with that is, and the kind of thing that Jesus does by releasing, I think, from that 10%, is it invites us to cut corners. Because you think, I don't need to do 10%, so you know what I can do? I can do a bit less. And that's all right, isn't it? And it's that you go back to that cutting corners, and what we see here is the people saying like, oh, you know, let's just give God some stuff. And he's saying, honestly, I promise you, if you trust me, it's worth it. And this is the only time in the Bible where God says, test me. He says, just test me in this. He said, if you give me what we have talked about in the agreement, if you give me that 10%, like, honestly, I will pour out blessings and you will be all right. You will be in a better place. You know, and it's not because God, like we said about a month ago, God hasn't got this weird obsession with just getting our money. It's about, do we trust him? What are we afraid of? What are we holding back from him? And you know what? And we can apply that to so many areas of our life. Do I trust him enough with my family, with my relationships, with my job? And money is just such a big one that we can kind of hold back and go, oh, I'm just going to kind of hold that off and keep that back from him. And so the third thing there is trust. And we're nearly done, but that's going to take us to Act 3. And so our dramatist is going to come up with our final act of the whole conversation here.
Then those who feared the Lord talked with each other, and the Lord listened and heard. A scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who had feared the Lord and honored his name.
On the day when I act, they will be my treasured possession. I will spare them just as a father has compassion and spares his son who serves him.
Revelation 21 verse 1-4 says, Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you. There you go. They didn't leave it silent. I knew you wouldn't. And so we get to Act 3, the final act, and this is the kind of time of restoration. You know, like we've got this relational breakdown where kind of things are a mess, and God's saying, honestly, this is my heart. You know, and then he talks about this restoration, and in chapter 3, it talks this kind of little bit, which it seems like it's a kind of an odd thing to have in there. It sort of stands out a bit different. And it talks about this faithful remnant, about the people who knew what it was to trust in God, the people who knew what it was to stick with him and be faithful, even when it was more difficult. And so it says this faithful remnant, those who feared the Lord, they talked with each other, and the Lord listened and heard. And a scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name. And on that day when I act, says the Lord, they will be my treasured possession. I will spare them just as a father has compassion and spares his son who serves him. And as I read that, I thought, oh man, I just want to be God's treasured possession. You know, that's what I want. And this God who comes and he longs to restore that relationship. And in another part of Malachi 3, it talks about a refiner, one who will make us like gold. And you know what, we live the other side of Jesus, and we have a guy who's come, and somehow through the life of Jesus, through him giving his life on a cross, that somehow we can be restored, we can be refined, that somehow God can look at us and accept us as part of his family, accept us as kind of being able to come before him because of what Jesus did. There's this great verse which says, like, boldly we can approach God and we can approach that throne of grace. And we can only approach it boldly because of what Jesus did. Only because Jesus came and he gave himself so that we could be that treasure possession, so that we could have that kind of place. And a lot of this preach has kind of used kind of relational language unashamedly, because when the Bible talks about the relationship between us and him, it uses this language of relationship. It uses the language of being faithful. It uses, and the bit that Toby read at the end, that final bit of the Bible, talks about a wedding. It talks about, do you know what, our future is going to be there with God forever. And it talks about that heart, that intimacy, that kind of almost romance element of a God who longs to pursue us, who longs to be near to us. And just as we said at the start, that God had said, like, I have loved you. And he called Israel to look back and say, see how I have loved you. And at the end, in that faithful remnant bit, he says, and those who are faithful to me, who trust in me, I will love you forever and you will be my people. And that's what we see in Revelation, this God who is saying, like, I have loved you and I will love you forever. And this year, as part of this Australia kind of trip that I went on, I had to, one of the more difficult things that I was going to face in this Australia trip, I knew that seeing 4 groups of people, I was going to have to walk them through 2017. And I was going to have to say, I was going to have to tell that story 4 separate times and about everything that had happened. And I knew it was going to be tough, and I knew it was going to be sad, and I was going to be sad, and they were going to be sad. And I knew that was going to happen. But you know what? As I did it, kind of at the end of that year, I was able to kind of tell the story and go through all of the kind of sadness and difficulty. But I was able to just take that step back and go, do you know what? I see a God who's been so faithful. I see a God who has been there. I see a God who, in the midst of when I had no idea what I was going to do, a God who was there and who would not leave and who would not let me go. And at that point in January this year, I was able to look forward and say, do you know what? I can actually see forward, and I can see a God who I know is going to be faithful. I can see a God who's got this incredible plan for all these young people, and somehow I get to be a part of that journey to see these young people go way further than I would ever go, and see how amazing the things that God is going to do with them. And it was just this great ability to be able to take a step back and just see God for what he's done and who he is. And normally I would kind of finish by giving you all a little kind of gift. And it's not that I can't think of a gift. Don't think I've run out of ideas, you cynics. Right? But this time I just kind of felt that instead of me giving us something to remember, well, I thought we're just going to respond by giving something back to God. And just as we think about the kind of the things that this passage has gone through and this book goes through, there might have been in those 2 sort of areas that we talked about, some of that might have stood out, that in that breakdown, maybe you feel quite defensive, that as soon as somebody comes to you, you know you've got the barriers up. Or maybe you're somebody who feels like, oh, you know what, I am kind of coasting, or I've cut corners. Or maybe you just think, I've lost that awe of who God is. Or maybe in that shared interest, you think, you know what, God, would you raise up a heart of justice for me? Or maybe I need that intimacy. I need to just return to you. Or maybe you struggle with trusting God. Well, what we're going to do is we're just going to spend some time kind of praying and ministering into that. And so Andy, he's going to come up and just going to play a song or whatever for us. But what I'm going to ask you to do is, instead of just kind of sitting here and just kind of do that for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you to do two things. In a second, I'm going to pray. And like for most of you, I'm just going to ask, would you just like respond, just even by just standing and just saying, like, whatever it is that maybe stands out, whatever it is that needs to happen between you and God, I just invite you to stand and make that go on. But some of you, and I don't know who that is, but I just got the feeling this morning that some of you don't need to stand. Some of you need to kneel. Some of you just need to, and I think maybe it's the people who've got that kind of thing about needing to know that awe of who God is. Some of you need to just be on your knees and just say, like, there's something holy in itself about kneeling, but just knowing, God, you are worthy of my worship. And so I'm just going to, as I'm going to kind of invite us to kind of join in and do whatever Andy says, I'm just going to pray. And so as we do that, I would either invite you to stand or to kneel. And if you don't want to, you can sit there, that's fine. But I'm just going to pray. So as I pray, if that's you, if you want to stand or kneel, and we're just going to offer something to God and respond. So, God, we just thank you that somehow, despite all of our flaws, all of our weaknesses, despite all of the many problems that we bring, Lord, somehow you desire intimacy. Somehow you love us so much that you came to restore that relationship. Lord, not because that somehow we became good enough, but somehow you just love us that much that you are so longing to have us as part of your family. And so, God, in this moment, we just offer our hearts to you. We offer our lives to you, Lord. That we just say you are so worthy. Lord, would you just make us into so much more than we ever believed we could be? That we would know you so much clearer in our lives. God, we just say we love you. We don't want to go through the motions. We don't want to play at church. We want to be people who want to be in this and know you so clearly. Help us with that, Lord.